I have 2 goals for today. Goal number 1, get that manifold off. Goal number 2, don't break anything. Let's get to it. There's a few things that need to happen in order to get this manifold off. There's some hoses underneath the manifold that need to be disconnected. Vacuum lines here. We have bolts surrounding that are connected to the TGVs, which I've already removed. We have grounding straps, which I've already removed. And we have the throttle body, which I'm still debating on whether or not I'm going to remove. It's also connected to the fuel lines with some bolts. So it's going to be a little bit tricky to get under there and disconnect the fuel lines. But should be relatively straightforward. That was a lot more difficult than I thought it was going to be. I gave up on I originally just wanted to pull the actual intake manifold off, but it's really overly challenging to do it that way. There's bolts that connect the manifold to the stock fuel rail, and so I gave up and I gave in, and I just pulled everything in here's got to come out anyways. So I just pulled it out all in one go. TGVs, fuel rails, engine harness, everything came out all in one go, and it's disgusting in here. There's so much gunk and just gross stuff on top of the engine block, so I'm gonna get it all cleaned off. The turbo looks in pretty good condition. There's no forward back play. There's a little bit of side play, but that should be normal. For having almost 100,000 miles on it, this motor is not that bad condition wise. So yeah, I'm gonna go through, get everything cleaned out, and we'll move on from there. So it's the next day, and yesterday off camera, I went through and just deep cleaned as much as I could the top of this engine block and all the hoses and wires surrounding it. I went through and I cleaned and I retaped some areas on the engine harness. Like this spot needed retaping, it was just bare wire exposed there. So I retaped that up and shrunk it down. And I just went through and I cleaned. Good news is now it's time to actually build these fuel rails. So we have all the components here to start building these fuel lines. I have some protective sheathing coming today that I'm gonna put over this to add a little bit of protection, cover up this green logoing, and make the engine bay look a little bit cleaner. I'm gonna take a little bit of time to kind of figure this out, get this built up, and then we will go from there. So we've got the regulator loosely mounted to the bracket. Now in the install, you can tell, and I'll show you, that this is pretty much straight on, and I believe it's closer to the actual OEM hard lines. So that's where I'm thinking that I'm gonna need either more line or I'm gonna need to make a new bracket. It's weird because the bracket fits perfectly according to the instructions. Like it's the same insulation, it's just on these earlier chassis, the mounting points are canted slightly. So we'll see if this causes problems. Hopefully it doesn't. Hopefully they give you a little bit of extra line. So all the adapters are in place. So I'm gonna loosely install them just so we can get an idea on how long the lines need to be and where to cut them. So honestly, I'm not going to include any of the footage from that because it's really boring and you can't really see much, and for what you would gain out of it, I can explain it in about 15 seconds. So starting on the right hand fuel rail, I use the 45-degree fitting and I routed the line. I haven't decided yet if I'm going to route the line under and through here along with the coolant pipe or back here like how it is. It all kind of depends on fitment once we get the turbo inlet. I gave myself a little bit of extra slack so that I could run it both ways depending on what I needed. So that comes under here and will connect to this feed pipe. The right hand fuel rail has a short line coming off of a straight fitting from the swivel and will come to this fitting right here. On the OEM hard lines, it's really simple. It's just 2 almost identical sections of line. The feed runs up into the top feed on the reg, and the return runs down to the bottom return on the reg. So it's the next day. The line sheathing didn't come in till real late yesterday. I thought it was going to be here way earlier, but it's here now. And so the last thing we really need to do to finish this fuel rail build is to sheath the rest of the lines. I went ahead and tried my hand at it on one of the lines, and it turned out pretty well. So I'm gonna go through and I'm gonna finish wrapping all these lines. It's actually fairly simple. And then after that, it's pretty much done. There's not much to do left, at least for the fueling intake side. I will have to get some, I believe it's 1/4 inch line, some vacuum line, to plumb the reference on the manifold to the boost reference on the regulator. Get that plumbed up, but that's honestly something that even if I didn't finish today, I could get that done another day. So let's get these lines built and keep on moving and get this job done. Let me just start by saying that anything manifold related takes forever. This, I got it back on, but it took me probably 2.5 hours. And I got it all back together. It took a long time, I'm not gonna lie. Now, maybe more experienced people doing this are better, of course they are. But if you're doing it your first time or you haven't done it a lot, it takes forever. And it takes forever because you have to make sure that everything's plugged in. There's so many different plugs with the wire harness and there's so many different bolts, but it's together, it's back on. Now everything is finished. I still have to connect the fuel lines to the reg. I'm waiting to do that until I get final kind of placement of the turbo inlet. It's in there, but obviously the turbo is out. So I'm gonna wait till I get this fully seated because the line runs under and then under the turbo inlet. So I don't wanna have like the line pull up and like put pressure on the turbo inlet and make it harder to fit onto the turbo. But it's nice. I mean, this table was full of parts just a couple days ago, and now we only have the throttle body and the intake. So one of the last things that needs to be done in regards to the fuel setup is the fuel pump and all the fuel wiring that goes along with it. I got the iWire fuel pump kit. What this basically does is if you run an upgraded pump on the factory terminal, the factory terminal gets so hot that it actually melts the terminal, and it just makes it hard for the pump to work, and it just disrupts the electrical connection. This kit also adds a new controller, so it makes it easier to tune when we come to tuning. In order to do that, I'm going to have to pull out the seats like I had before. I wish I hadn't reinstalled them, but here we are. Pull out the seats, get the fuel door off, and get the pump and basket out. And I want to make sure that I do this in a well-ventilated area because there's still a good chunk of gas left in the tank. It's probably half or a little bit over half full. So we're gonna spill fuel everywhere. So I'm gonna get all the interior stripped out, and then I'm gonna start working on getting the basket out. It's pretty straightforward. It takes a little bit of finagling, but it's really easy. All it is here's the fuel tank back here under the fuel door, some surrounding 8mm nuts, some fuel lines, and a plug. So I'm going to set up the tripod and we can go through and install the fuel pump. But a lot of these lines are just stuck on there. There we go, not anymore. So here's your old fuel pump and fuel sock, and we're basically not going to use that anymore. Let's get the new harness. Because instead of using the factory terminal and plug, you basically drill holes in the top hat, and these two wires will be put on studs. That way, like the name suggests, it's a stud bypass kit, so we bypass the factory connectors. So I have the stud bypass kit fully installed. It's actually really simple. You run a new harness from the filter up into the stud bypass, and it gets sandwiched between nuts and a stud, and then it connects to the same wire up top, and then this will plug into the main harness once we install it. I'll probably just time-lapse the rest of the install of the kit and then explain it afterwards because it's really easy. It's easier for me to explain it afterwards than to explain it as I'm going, and it's kind of hard to film and show you guys what I'm talking about. So I'm just going to go through, time-lapse, get that install done, and then wrap this up, and then we're going to actually put some power into this car for the first time in a while and make sure that that fuel pump primes and go from there. Okay, so I think we're ready to go. I have it all wired up, all connected. We have the new controller back here. It's kind of hard to see. The new controller plugs into the factory controller. You have your ground up here. It runs into the fuel tank. I didn't run, usually you're supposed to run this under the fuel lid, but I literally could not get this plug to get through that little grommet right there to save my life. So I'm just gonna run it like this, and I will probably cut out a little slot in the fuel cap for these wires. But it also, I kind of like having all the wires inside the cab. That way, you know, we don't have wires underneath the car, possibility of, you know, getting torn up and destroyed. But then we have the main power harness that runs across the car, along with the fuse, the 10-amp fuse that runs across the car, up the sidewell, into the passenger sidewell, and it runs up into the fuse box, and then that goes through a grommet under the steering wheel, through into the engine bay, up to the front, where it hits the front circuit breaker, and that connects to the power. So I'm going to connect the ground. The car is of course going to freak out, and it's going to throw 11 million different codes because you know, we're missing so many different sensors and yada yada yada. But we can at least know if the fuel pump primes. So let's test it. I'm a little bit nervous, but I think it'll work. So we've got power, and that's a good thing. The access port's lighting up. Let's see if this works. I think it works. Let's go. Let's try one more time. Awesome, dude. Let's go. Let's check the fuel reg. I know the pressure, the PSI is going to be off, but at least, yep, we have fuel in the reg. I will need to adjust the reg. We're sitting at only about 20 PSI. We need to be about 40. I don't totally know the exact number on that, but it works. That's awesome. Let's go. I'm so happy about that. And it took forever. So I'm glad that it's done and we can move on to getting this build back and getting this motor running. This is awesome. I'm super excited about this. It's finally done. It took forever. It took all day. I mean, I seriously started at like 10 o'clock and it's like 6 o'clock now. So the fuel system's ready to go. That was the last little bit that we needed to install in order to get fueling done. It took a while, but it's definitely going to be worth it. I'm so excited. It looks awesome. It's nice to see things starting to come together. I hope you guys have been enjoying the content so far. I know it's been super fun and challenging for me. So if you wouldn't mind hitting a subscribe and commenting, let me know what you think. I always like to see feedback from people, you know, that may know more than me, or just what you guys think. So drop a comment down below. Let me know what you think of the build so far. And with that, I think that's going to be it. And we'll see you in the next one.